I want to start with the big picture, Alan. A strong dollar makes exports expensive and U.S. labor uncompetitive. And I think if there's any nobility in maybe what Trump is trying to do is to reshore manufacturing. And with policymakers questioning King Dollar, that would have been the knucklehead Jared Bernstein dethroned King Dollar, and White House Vice President Vance writing on White House letterhead that Triffin's dilemma is actually a problem for the U.S. now because of the evisceration and hollowing out of the manufacturing base. And the Genius Act, tying stablecoins to treasuries for synthetic demand for the treasury. My question to you, first question is, do you think the U.S. is quietly tolerating or maybe even engineering a weaker dollar to possibly restore and reshore manufacturing?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I definitely think they're doing that because the incentives are such that they kind of have to. There's really no option. The dollar does need to be weaker, and this is part of Triffin's dilemma, and it also happens, we see it with cryptocurrencies, which is kind of funny. There's that sort of tension about you issue all the coins to the founders, but then if you want anyone to use them, you have to sell them into the market, but that puts downward pressure and downward value on the coin. So there's that constant balancing act. The same thing happens domestically with a fiat currency. And of course, the same thing happens globally when you have the world reserve currency. So that's the Triffin dilemma. So yes, I do think there is a engineered plan to weaken the dollar relative to other fiat currencies. And of course, that means relative to gold and silver. So that's why we see the prices of those metals going up. We do see central banks acquiring gold like never before. And at a certain point, economics turns into an existential crisis for the government of a country. And the United States government is experiencing that right now. The economics on paper can work linearly for a while. And at a certain point, you hit that exponential tipping point. You hit a state change, like when you're boiling water, and the system itself changes. And we're getting very, very close to that right now. It can't go on too much longer. It's definitely an existential threat to have certain kinds of manufacturing inside our own borders. So they're definitely doing that.
Right. I think that's important to do so with AI taking 50% of entry-level jobs in the next few years, with 60% of the country with no college education. We don't make anything anymore. There is nobility in realizing that as a country, you must not be reliant on the world for your manufacturing. And I'm glad you see it that way. This has been something that's been on my mind for a very long time. And I think that also sets the stage for my next question, which is how private players may be reacting to this. And is there really this private entity, or is it commingled with the government? What I mean by that is Bo Hines, Trump's crypto czar until August, is now the CEO of USA Tether. And Tether is taking U.S. Treasury yield as being backing the new stablecoin in the Genius Act and converting it into gold and Bitcoin, the very assets that rise when the dollar weakens. Is this more diversification, or specifically, do you think Tether could be front-running and, in fact, let's just say accelerating the U.S. policy and in the process undermining confidence in the dollar to create this weakness in the dollar and perhaps even to have the dollar depreciate or devalue underneath rising Bitcoin and rising gold?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I haven't studied the mechanics of Tether so far that I would claim to be an expert at it. But what I can say is that in general, when you know that the dollar is going to get weaker over time, and it's a question of do we make it even weaker deliberately, or do we sort of let it take its own pace? There's a few ways you can react to that as a private player or as a competing government, for example. You can try to accelerate it yourself through various means, and it depends how large of a player you are. Or, if you want to catch butterflies, you don't build more nets, you build a garden and you let the butterflies come to you. So as a retail investor, if you imagine the smallest guy in the game, if you know that the dollar is going to get weaker, you can buy hard assets like gold, silver, or Bitcoin and just wait. And it will come to you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to convince anybody. You don't have to write letters to Congress. You don't have to set policy. So I think there's a combination of many different actions that players are taking. In the case of Bo Hines, I honestly don't know, so I probably shouldn't speculate. But it almost ceases to be a meaningful distinction if Bo and Tether and whoever he's working with, if they know the future and they know that it's inevitable, they're taking a position, whether they're causing it or receiving it. It's almost less important than just stepping out and seeing what the trade is going to be. So I'm not sure, I guess, to answer your question.
But I think, to your point, information is just as valuable as money. We're seeing, and have been, the central banks front run this gold run for the last 5 or 6 years, and kind of leads me to my next question. We're seeing record physical deliveries on COMEX and shrinking LBMA inventories. To me, that looks more like sovereign accumulation than retail. As someone who's in the retail space, I would tell you I'm almost positive it is. And it's traders certainly know the information. You now have Morgan Stanley moving away from a 60-40 stock bond allocation, as Walt talked about forever, to a 60-20-20. Citing, again, they expect sell half your bonds and buy gold. You have Bartnett from Bank of America saying 25, 25, 25, 25. Stock, bond, short-term treasuries, gold. You got Gunlock saying 25% gold is not overweight. There's more and more clues out there from big money that seems to be now rethinking gold, but the money that has been front-running this, the most well-informed traders in the world, seem to have known this was coming.
You know, when we talk about the big picture, I think we have to start with the uncomfortable truth that the US dollar's strength, what policymakers used to call king dollar, has been both a blessing and a curse. A strong dollar projects power, but it also strangles your own manufacturing base. It makes exports expensive, imports cheap, and slowly hollows out the backbone of your economy. The working class pays the price while financial assets soar. For decades, that was America's trade-off. But something's changing. If you look carefully, you can see hints that the United States is quietly, maybe even deliberately, engineering a weaker dollar. Why? Because it has no other choice. With Triffin's dilemma now turned inward, the very role of the dollar as the global reserve currency has become an existential liability. The US must supply the world with dollars, but doing so means running endless deficits, shipping out jobs, and bleeding away productive capacity. Eventually, you end up with what we have now, a service economy addicted to debt and imports. So yes, I think there's an engineered plan, perhaps not fully coordinated, but certainly tolerated, to weaken the dollar. And the incentives line up. A weaker dollar helps reshore manufacturing, makes US exports competitive again, and helps Washington inflate away the debt mountain without explicitly admitting default. When you've got over $38 trillion in federal debt and $175 trillion in unfunded liabilities, you either inflate or you implode. It's a classic late-stage empire dilemma. The British went through it, the Spanish went through it, and now it's our turn. But what's fascinating is how this shift is being disguised under new buzzwords. Instead of calling it devaluation, they call it restoring competitiveness. Instead of calling it money printing, they call it liquidity provision. And instead of calling it a new monetary system, they call it innovation. But make no mistake, this is the soft preparation for a hard reset. Now, the Genius Act and the broader stablecoin ecosystem fit right into that strategy. When you create a framework where stablecoins are backed by US treasuries, you're manufacturing synthetic demand for those treasuries, effectively monetizing the debt through private markets. That's not just convenient, it's brilliant. It creates a circular flow. Treasury issues debt, stablecoin issuers buy it, users adopt the stablecoin, and the US gains digital dominance while absorbing inflation silently. It's a digital age version of Bretton Woods, just without the gold peg. But here's where it gets interesting. As the US tries to manage this balancing act, private entities like Tether are taking the playbook and running ahead with it. And they're not doing it with just treasuries, they're layering in gold and Bitcoin. That's not diversification. That's a strategic hedge against the very system they're plugged into. Think about it. Tether's reserves now include billions in US treasuries, billions in gold, and a growing pile of Bitcoin. That's the triad of the new monetary reality: fiat yield, hard collateral, and digital liquidity. It's the perfect hedge against a managed dollar decline. Now, is Tether front-running US policy? I think so. But that's not necessarily sinister. It's rational. When you know where the road leads, The smart money gets there first. Tether and other digital liquidity providers are acting like central banks used to, absorbing yield where they can, securing gold for credibility, and adopting Bitcoin as a parallel reserve asset. They're building a balance sheet for a post-dollar world, one digital block at a time. The question is, are they causing the dollar's weakness or simply anticipating it? I'd argue it hardly matters anymore. The outcome is the same. Whether you're steering the ship or surfing the wave, you're still heading toward the same shore. And this brings me to the deeper issue, the existential crisis facing the US government. It's not just about debt and deficits.